Hello, I'm Scott Hammond from INSEAD Knowledge, and it's my pleasure today to welcome Herminia Ibarra, who has just published a rather provocative article in the Harvard Business Review called Women and the Vision Thing. Could you say a little bit about why you call it the vision thing, which seems a little pejorative?
Well, the phrase harks back to when the first President Bush was criticized for not having a vision, and he actually disparaged the comment by saying, "Oh, you're asking me again about that, the vision thing." It's not meant to disparage the importance of having a vision. It's just meant as a way of signaling the fact that a lot of people have trouble with that.
But you use it in the context of reporting on a study that you did, which was really quite extensive among executive education participants at INSEAD, that measured perceptions of women in professional roles, in which the area that you call envisioning actually turned out to be a key point of difference where women did not score as well as men. What conclusions did you draw from that, and tell us a little bit about what the questions were that raised in your mind.
Let me give a little background on that, because that was a set of findings that surprised us as well as it might have surprised you. We wanted to capitalize on a very unique database that we have here of 360-degree evaluations which the executives that come to INSEAD take. We had a database of over 2,000 managers and over 19,000 observers who rated them on a number of things. And we were quite curious to see, how are women rated relative to men? Is there a bias? Are they rated less favorably? And is there any difference in the way that men view women and that women view women, or the other way around, that women view men and that men view men? So we could really make all of the different comparisons. And when we first took a look at the data, we were actually very surprised to see, given all the research that's been done about the implicit biases that exist that prejudice women, we're very surprised to see that in fact women scored higher than men on a lot of these different dimensions, if not equally. But there was one exception to that pattern, and it was on a scale that's called envisioning, which has to do with being able to articulate a vision of the future and translate that into a strategic direction for the organization. The reason we called it the vision thing is because we were hypothesizing that if women are at a disadvantage these days, well, they're good at rewarding, at feedback, at emotional intelligence, communicating, all the list of things that you might imagine, but then there's the vision thing, and that's where they're viewed less well.
Since these 360-degree surveys measure perception and not necessarily fact, do you think it's a question of there being a real problem with women doing this, or a question of that women are perceived as not being able to envision things as imaginatively as men?
So it's going to be hard to tease out what is perception and what is reality, although when it comes to senior management, perception is reality. I mean, on what basis do you promote people to very senior roles in organizations? You get to a point where past performance isn't always the best indicator of how a person's going to do in a very different kind of job. And so people, both men and women, take bets on who's going to be able to lead. And leading, it turns out, is very much to do with articulating a different version of the future. And so if there is a perception there, it can very easily be transformed into reality if women are not being selected on the basis of this. Now, we did dig a little bit deeper because we wanted to understand what was going on. And so we asked a subset of women who had been to a number of programs to help us understand what was going on. And we also asked senior men who evaluate talent in general to help us understand, and we came up with 3 explanations. One explanation is that perhaps women don't necessarily have any kind of vision deficit in terms of articulating a vision, but the process by which they get to a vision and a strategy for the future is different, perhaps more collaborative, and therefore isn't attributed the same kind of visionary quality. Just recently I was doing a presentation in which I was only able to use images to represent the ideas, and so I was looking for something that depicted vision. All of the images showed some version of a solitary man at the top of a mountain looking across into the horizon. If that's our image of what being visionary is, And in fact, the way you come up with a vision is through a fairly organic, chaotic, bottom-up, inclusive kind of process. It may not be labeled.
It could in fact be the opposite, that in the very process of connecting with a lot of people, doing a lot of listening, you're violating the cliche about this kind of solitary vision that comes to you, but in fact maybe you're getting better vision by talking to all these people, and maybe women are doing better at it.
I've never known somebody who was able to get a vision of the future by shutting himself in an office and just thinking deep thoughts. I mean, the way you envision the future is by being out there, trying to understand trends in the industry and society, talking to people. That's how you're able to formulate what are threats and opportunities in your business environment and how that might match up to capabilities that you have in the organization that you can use to move forward.
When we think of the word visionary, we often think of someone who's willing to be seen as maybe slightly crazy, slightly detached, taking risks, going out on a limb. Do you
the
think
eccentric inventor kind of idea?
Exactly, yeah.
So there's two angles to that. One of the second explanation that we came up with is that women might perhaps be more hesitant to go out on a limb with a very audacious statement that they don't necessarily have the facts to back up or the analysis to back up. And the reason for that is we still know today that women in many situations are still somewhat more vulnerable. They're more likely to be challenged on their points, and so it is safer to stick to the analysis and to stick to the data than to say, I have a dream. Now, so that's one potential explanation. Someone just wrote into me a couple of days ago reacting to the article and saying that she thinks it's a function of communication, and that is women may be communicating their visions in less audacious, bold, brash, out there kind of language, and as a result, it doesn't get pegged in the same way as it might be when a man puts forth a similar kind of vision. So that's another explanation. We had a third, and it's sort of related, and that is a number of the women that we spoke to essentially express a little skepticism, and that's another use of the term the vision thing, and basically feeling that a lot of what often goes or is sold as vision is a lot of airy-fairy talk with not necessarily a lot to back it up. And so from their perspective, what was important was being able to execute, staying grounded, down to earth, making sure that things happen and not worrying so much about a lot of talk with very little action to back it up. And we also find that interesting because if in fact it is a more likely trend for women to base their view of themselves as a leader in this kind of very down-to-earth, just think of the metaphor, there's down-to-earth and then there's vision, lofty, airy, there may be a problem there.
You have gone on from the analysis and the description of the phenomenon that showed up in the study to actually make some concrete recommendations about how people, men or women, who are assuming a more strategic role in their company can actually address this. And one of the things that fascinated me most on the list of things that you talk about is what you call the identity trap, where you get trapped into a position of being recognized as the person who knows certain things, and the organization conspires to keep you in that position.
Basically, all of my research, or most of my research, is about how people make transitions from one role to another, and particularly transitions that move people into very different roles, where what made them successful in the past is exactly the recipe for failure in the future. And so I see that every day in both men and women. You're a great analyst, but now you have to be a trusted client advisor. You're a great functional expert, but now you have to be a general manager. You're very good operationally, but now you're asked to be a strategist. Those are not just different skill sets. They're different conceptions of who you are, what you're good at, how you contribute, what you add value on, how you spend your time. And so for both men and women, there is that danger of an identity trap, getting stuck in what you've been good at in the past. My study suggests that for women, that identity trap may be even more powerful if, in fact, there is the double bind. If you put yourself out there, you are more likely to get challenged. The only way to actually make these transitions is to experiment with risky behavior. And to do risky behavior, there has to be some measure of safety, some measure of comfort that you're not going to get slammed. And so, as far as I can see, this identity trap is something that that's worth looking out for.
You've written that the bad news is that there's this perception of women as lacking visionary capacity, but that the good news is that there's a lot of skills here that can be learned.
Any intangible behavior people learn like children learn. You see other people doing it and you see how they do it, and maybe you imitate, you learned from example, you learn from role models. That's one of the reasons why it's so important to see women in senior levels. It's not that you can't learn from someone that's different from you, but when you see people who are similar to you in certain regards, it just makes the absorption process that much easier.
And so on the kind of ground level, when you are in a seminar, in a program where you're working with people who are trying to deal with these challenges and obstacles, how do you organize it? Is it based on group work? Is it based on peer exchange? What's the actual technique for getting these ideas out there?
There's really a couple of different things. There isn't a class in becoming visionary, and so there's no session on that. One very key piece is getting out of the office, out of your immediate team, out of your immediate organization, and starting to branch out in terms of your network. Because that's how you're exposed to trends. That's how you're exposed to different views, and that's really what allows people to start to have a kind of a pattern recognition. They start to see the trends, and they start to see what that maybe their dumb ideas actually may have some real traction. So one important thing that we do in our courses is really push people to get out and not think about how to set strategy behind closed doors in the safety of their office, but how to start networking in a way that allows them a broader vision of the future. That's number one. Number two is a lot of this is communication. How do you take an idea and then learn to communicate it in a way that's going to be compelling, and not just compelling to people who have the same training as you, but compelling to a much broader audience? How can you take a set of statistics and instead of slapping them up on a PowerPoint, tell a story that's going to touch people's hearts? That also you learn by example and you learn by doing. And so in our programs we also have a number of workshops that help people start to communicate these very basic messages, but in a way that really touch people in a more profound way.
So there's something that a company can do almost on the institutional level to push things in the right direction and overcoming these obstacles.
I think overall companies need to be very careful about what goes into their leadership competency models and what goes into their leadership development performance assessments. Because one view might be, we want our leaders to be visionaries, so let's select on that trait. And what you might get there is just differences between men and women or people from different cultures and just how they communicate, how bold, how brash, how direct, all kinds of things having to do with communication styles, which may have very little to do with the actual capacity to see into the future and to get people aligned behind it. Another perspective might simply be to make sure you identify talent and give them the support and the capacity to develop and to express their ideas, and so in a sense think about a way of allowing them to become visionary as opposed to selecting for that characteristic.
Herminia, thanks for spending time with us today. Again, the article is Women and the Vision Thing in the January 2009 issue of the Harvard Business Review. I'm Scott Hammond. Thanks for joining us.